The Providence Municipal Court was filled with its usual Tuesday morning crowd. Traffic violators shifted nervously in wooden pews while Judge Frank Caprio reviewed the day's docket. The familiar sounds of shuffling papers and whispered conversations created a backdrop of routine justice. Among the adults sat a small figure that seemed out of place, a 7-year-old girl with dark braids. She clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit and kept glancing toward the judge's bench with unusual intensity. Her mother sat beside her, eyes red from crying, hands trembling as she held citation papers. The little girl's presence in this adult world of fines and violations felt both innocent and heartbreaking. As Judge Caprio called the next case, his eyes swept across the courtroom with practiced authority. For 30 years, he had seen every type of defendant walk through these doors. But when his gaze landed on the small girl, something made him pause mid-sentence. She was staring directly at him, with an expression far too serious for her age. Her tiny hand moved subtly, forming what appeared to be sign language gestures. The movements were deliberate, repeated 3 times with growing urgency. Judge Caprio's years of experience told him this wasn't random child behavior. This was communication. The girl's eyes never left his face, as if willing him to understand her silent plea. The courtroom fell into an unusual silence, as even the most distracted defendants noticed their judge had stopped speaking. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, his weathered hands gripping the edge of his bench. The little girl's signals became more pronounced, her small fingers spelling out letters with increasing desperation. Her mother remained oblivious, lost in her own worry about the citation they were facing. Court officers exchanged confused glances, unsure whether to intervene or wait for their judge's direction. The tension in the room was palpable, as everyone sensed something extraordinary was unfolding. Judge Caprio's mind raced, trying to decode the child's message while maintaining his judicial composure. Then, recognition dawned in the judge's eyes like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The little girl was signing HELP over and over, her movements becoming more frantic with each repetition. Judge Caprio's heart clenched as he realized this child was reaching out to him in the only way she knew how. Without warning, he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor in the sudden silence. "Court will recess for 10 minutes, he announced, his voice carrying an edge of urgency that surprised everyone present. The little girl's eyes filled with relief as she saw understanding wash over the judge's face. In that moment, Judge Frank Caprio knew he was about to make a decision that would change everything. Protocol be damned. Maria Santos had never imagined she would find herself in a courtroom with her 7-year-old daughter Elena. 3 months ago, life had been different. Her husband Carlos worked construction, they had a small apartment, and Elena attended school regularly. Then Carlos lost his job when the construction company folded overnight, taking their health insurance and steady income with it. The medical bills from Elena's emergency appendectomy last year had already stretched them thin. Now, with no income and mounting debts, Maria had been forced to live in their car with Elena. The parking ticket that brought them here today was issued while Maria slept in a hospital parking lot, waiting for free clinic hours to open. Elena had stopped speaking 3 weeks ago, shortly after a terrifying night when strange men approached their car. The trauma counselor at the Children's Center explained that selective mutism was Elena's way of protecting herself from an overwhelming situation. But Elena had been learning sign language at school before everything fell apart. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had started a program for deaf students. Maria didn't know sign language herself, which created another barrier between mother and daughter during their darkest hours. Elena communicated through gestures and drawings, creating a private world that even her loving mother couldn't fully enter. The little girl had become her own protector, watching everything with alert, serious eyes that belonged on someone much older. The night before their court date, Elena had drawn a picture that confused Maria completely. It showed a man in black robes, sitting high above everyone else, with rays of light coming from his hands. Elena had pointed to the drawing, then to herself, then made the same gestures she'd been practicing from her school sign language book. Maria assumed it was just childhood fantasy. Perhaps Elena was drawing a superhero or wizard from a story. She had no way of knowing that Elena had seen Judge Caprio on the small television in the children's center waiting room. The other kids had been watching the local news story about the compassionate judge who helped families in crisis. Elena had memorized his face and stored away hope that this man might be able to help them too. As they sat in the courtroom that morning, Elena's heart pounded with desperate determination. She had practiced the sign for help hundreds of times, hoping against hope that this kind-faced judge would understand her silent plea. Maria clutched their parking citation, worried about the $50 fine they couldn't afford to pay. She had no idea that her daughter was about to set in motion a series of events that would transform their lives forever. Elena's small hands trembled as she prepared to reach across the divide between their desperation and the judge's authority. In her 7-year-old mind, this was their last chance, and she refused to let it slip away in silence. Judge Caprio's mind raced as he stepped down from his bench, breaking decades of established courtroom protocol. In 30 years of service, he had never left his position during an active session without a formal recess. The court officers looked bewildered, unsure whether to follow their judge or maintain their posts. Frank's wife Betty had taught him basic sign language years ago when their neighbor's child was born deaf. He recognized Elena's desperate plea for help, but approaching a minor defendant directly violated multiple judicial procedures. His clerk whispered urgently about proper channels and Child Protective Services protocols. Yet something in the little girl's eyes told him that time was a luxury they didn't have. The weight of judicial responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders as he walked toward the gallery. Every decision he made in this courtroom was scrutinized by the media, reviewed by appellate courts, and held to the highest ethical standards. One wrong move could end his career and damage the court's reputation that he had spent decades building. His fellow judges would question his judgment. The Bar Association might file formal complaints about improper conduct. But Frank Caprio had not become known as the compassionate judge by always following the rulebook when human suffering demanded action. The little girl's silent cry for help echoed louder than any legal precedent or administrative guideline. His heart told him that some moments transcend protocol. This was one of them. As he approached Maria and Elena, Frank noticed the mother's worn clothing and the child's too thin frame. The stuffed rabbit Elena clutched was patched and faded, clearly a treasured companion through difficult times. Maria looked up at the approaching judge with confusion and fear, assuming she had done something wrong. The other defendants watched in stunned silence as their judge knelt down to Elena's eye level. Frank's weathered hands were gentle as he positioned himself where the little girl could see his face clearly. His voice was soft, barely audible to those sitting nearby, as he began to communicate directly with the frightened child. The entire courtroom held its breath, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Frank Caprio knew he was about to cross a line that could cost him everything he had worked for. But looking into Elena's desperate eyes, he realized that some lines exist to be crossed when human dignity is at stake. His reputation, his career, even his standing in the legal community seemed insignificant compared to this child's obvious distress. The parking citation that brought them here was clearly just the tip of an iceberg of larger problems. In this moment, Frank chose to be a human being first and a judge second. He raised his hands slowly and began to sign, "I see you and I want to help." Elena's eyes widened in amazement as Judge Caprio's hands formed the familiar signs she had learned at school. Through trembling fingers, she began to tell her story in the silent language that had become her refuge. "We live in car," her small hands spelled out, each gesture deliberate and heartbreaking. "Mama cries at night when she thinks I sleep." Judge Caprio's expression grew more serious with each revelation as Elena continued her silent testimony. "Bad men came to car window 3 nights ago," she signed, her movements becoming more urgent. "Mama was scared. I was scared too." Then the judge's hands clenched involuntarily as he understood the depth of their crisis. Maria watched in bewilderment as her daughter and the judge communicated in a language she couldn't understand. Elena's hands moved faster now, as if a dam had burst and months of suppressed fear came pouring out. "We have no food today," she signed to Judge Caprio, whose poker face began to crack under the weight of her words. "Mama sold her ring to buy me crackers yesterday." The judge glanced up at Maria, seeing her worn purse and the way she clutched the parking citation with shaking hands. Elena continued, "The parking ticket is because Mama parked wrong at the hospital lot." Her small fingers spelled out their desperate reality. Sleeping in parking lots, waiting for free clinics, hiding from authorities who might separate them. Judge Caprio's throat tightened as Elena revealed the final piece of her secret message. Her hands formed the signs slowly, as if each word carried enormous weight. "I saw you on TV helping people." She pointed to the judge, then to herself, then back to him, with desperate hope in her eyes. "The other kids said you make miracles happen for families who need help." Elena's next signs made Frank's heart skip a beat. "Please don't let them take me away from Mama." The little girl had seen enough of the system to understand that being homeless could mean separation from her mother. Her desperate signal hadn't just been a cry for help, it was a plea to keep her family together. The courtroom remained frozen in silence as Judge Caprio processed the full magnitude of what Elena had shared. This wasn't just about a parking violation, it was about a family's survival and a child's terror of losing the only stability she had left. Maria noticed tears forming in the judge's eyes, though she still couldn't understand what her daughter had communicated. Elena's final signs were simple, but devastating in their clarity. "We have nowhere else to go." Judge Caprio realized that his next decision wouldn't just determine the outcome of a traffic citation, it would determine whether this family had any hope left. The weight of Elena's trust settled on his shoulders like a sacred responsibility he couldn't ignore. Judge Caprio stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing with each passing second as he looked down at Elena's hopeful face. He turned to address the packed courtroom, his voice carrying a gravity that commanded absolute attention from everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to do something that goes against every protocol I've sworn to uphold as a judge." The court reporter's fingers froze over her keyboard, unsure whether she should continue recording what might be career-ending words. But sometimes the law must bow to a higher calling, our shared humanity. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as defendants and observers realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Frank's bailiff stepped forward, concern etched across his weathered face, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. Without another word, Judge Caprio walked to his chambers and returned with his personal wallet and cell phone. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as he knelt beside Maria, speaking in gentle Spanish that he had learned during his years serving Providence's diverse community. "Señora Santos, your daughter has told me about your situation," he said, switching to English so Elena could understand. He handed Maria $200 from his own pocket, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from the court clerk. "This is not charity from the court. This is help from one human being to another." Maria's hands trembled as she tried to refuse the money, but Frank gently closed her fingers around the bills. "Your daughter is brave beyond her years, and she deserves a safe place to sleep tonight." The judge then did something that would make headlines across the nation. He called his own pastor directly from the bench. "Father Miguel, this is Frank Caprio. I need your help right now with a family in crisis." His voice carried across the silent courtroom as he arranged emergency shelter through his church's outreach program. Several defendants in the gallery began wiping tears from their eyes, moved by their judge's unprecedented compassion. The court officers exchanged uncertain glances, knowing they were witnessing either the most beautiful or most career-destroying moment in their courthouse's history. Elena watched in amazement as the man she had trusted with her secret signal transformed from distant authority figure to guardian angel. Maria sobbed quietly, overwhelmed by kindness she had never expected to find in a courtroom. Judge Caprio dismissed Elena's mother's parking citation with a bang of his gavel that seemed to echo through the universe. "Case dismissed due to extraordinary circumstances," he announced, his voice strong despite the emotional weight of the moment. He knelt down one final time to sign to Elena. "You are safe now, brave girl. You and your mama will be okay." The little girl's response was not in sign language. For the first time in 3 weeks, Elena spoke aloud. "Thank you, Judge Caprio," she whispered, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom like a prayer answered. Every person present knew they had just witnessed something that would stay with them forever. The moment when justice became love. Within hours of the court session, word of Judge Caprio's unprecedented act of compassion spread through Providence like wildfire. Maria Gonzalez, a local news reporter who had been covering routine traffic court, immediately recognized the extraordinary nature of what she had witnessed. Her evening news segment about the judge who broke protocol to help a homeless family struck a chord that resonated far beyond Rhode Island's borders. The courthouse phone began ringing incessantly as community members called, asking how they could help the Santos family. Local businesses offered jobs, apartments, and services without being asked, creating a spontaneous network of support that amazed even seasoned social workers. By nightfall, Father Miguel's church had received over 50 calls from people wanting to contribute to Elena and Maria's welfare. The story had awakened something powerful in the community, a reminder that individual acts of courage could inspire collective action. Elena's former teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, saw the news coverage and immediately drove to the church shelter where the family was staying. She brought Elena's favorite books and art supplies, along with information about programs that could help Maria find stable housing and employment. The owner of Tony's Pizza, a longtime court regular himself, arrived with dinner and a job offer for Maria. "Judge Caprio helped me when I couldn't pay my fines years ago," Tony explained, his eyes moist with emotion. "Now it's time to pay it forward." Local attorney Sarah Mitchell offered her services pro bono to help Maria navigate housing assistance programs and resolve any legal issues. Even the court officers who had initially looked concerned about the judge's protocol breach began sharing the story with pride. Providence Community Health Center called to offer Eleanor free counseling services to help her process her recent trauma. The response extended beyond immediate practical help to something deeper, a community rediscovering its capacity for compassion. Elena's story became a catalyst for examining how many other families might be struggling in silence, hidden from view, but desperately needing support. Local churches announced new outreach programs, businesses created emergency assistance funds, and neighbors began checking on each other with renewed attention. The elementary school, where Eleanor had learned sign language, started a fund to help other families facing housing crises. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Be Like Caprio" and "Listen to the Children," as people shared their own stories of times when someone had shown them unexpected kindness. The ripple effects of one judge's decision to follow his heart instead of procedure were creating waves of generosity throughout the community. By the end of the week, Maria had 3 job interviews lined up and 2 solid housing options to consider. Elena had returned to school with the support of counselors and teachers who understood her recent trauma. But perhaps most importantly, she had found her voice again, literally and figuratively. The little girl who had communicated her family's desperation through silent hand signals was now speaking confidently about her dreams for the future. The community that had rallied around them wasn't just offering temporary help, but creating lasting connections that would sustain the Santos family through whatever challenges lay ahead. Judge Caprio had shown them that sometimes breaking the rules was the most moral thing a person could do. Within 48 hours of the courtroom incident, Judge Caprio received a formal letter from the Rhode Island Judicial Ethics Commission requesting a meeting. The crisp legal document outlined potential violations of judicial conduct codes, specifically regarding impartiality, proper procedure, and financial interactions with defendants. Chief Judge Patricia Williams called Frank into her office, her expression a mixture of concern and disappointment. "Frank, I understand your heart was in the right place, but you've put us all in an impossible position," she said, sliding the complaint across her mahogany desk. The Providence Bar Association had received 3 formal complaints from attorneys who argued that his actions set a dangerous precedent for judicial favoritism. Local defense attorneys worried that future defendants might expect similar treatment, while prosecutors questioned whether the court could maintain its credibility. The weight of institutional disapproval pressed down on Frank's shoulders like a lead blanket. The Judicial Review Board scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week, threatening Frank's 30-year career with potential suspension or removal from the bench. Legal scholars debated the case on television, with some arguing that judges must remain emotionally detached to ensure equal justice under law. Professor James Hartford from Rhode Island Law School appeared on multiple news programs, stating that good intentions cannot excuse the violation of fundamental judicial principles. The state's Attorney General office launched their own investigation into whether Judge Caprio's actions constituted an abuse of judicial power. Frank's own colleagues began distancing themselves, fearful that association with his case might damage their own reputations. Court administrators scrambled to implement new protocols to prevent similar incidents, treating Frank's act of compassion like a contagious disease. The legal establishment seemed determined to make an example of the judge who had dared to put humanity before procedure. Frank spent sleepless nights reviewing his 3 decades of service, wondering if one moment of following his heart would erase a lifetime of dedication to justice. His wife, Betty, found him in his study at 2 a.m., staring at case files and commendations that suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of potential disgrace. "Maybe I was wrong," Frank confided to her, his voice heavy with doubt and exhaustion. "Maybe the system exists the way it does for good reasons I was too emotional to see." Betty took his weathered hands in hers, reminding him of the hundreds of families he had helped within the bounds of law over the years. The irony was bitter. The very compassion that had made him beloved by his community was now being used as evidence against his fitness to serve. Frank realized that defending his actions might require him to choose between his career and his conscience. The preliminary hearing date loomed like a storm cloud over Frank's remaining days on the bench. He continued his regular court schedule, but every decision felt scrutinized, every interaction measured against the new spotlight on his conduct. Younger judges avoided him in the courthouse hallways, treating him like a cautionary tale rather than a respected colleague. Frank's longtime bailiff, Officer Martinez, quietly expressed his support, but even loyal courthouse staff seemed uncertain about their judge's future. The man who had spent his career believing that justice and compassion could coexist now faced a system demanding he choose between them. As Frank prepared his defense for the ethics hearing, he wondered if saving one family had been worth potentially destroying his ability to help countless others in the future. 3 months after that pivotal courtroom moment, Maria Santos stood in her new apartment kitchen, preparing Elena's favorite breakfast before school. The modest two-bedroom unit wasn't luxurious, but it had something their car never could provide: safety, stability, and hope for the future. Maria had been promoted to assistant manager at Tony's Pizza after proving herself as a dedicated and hard-working employee. Elena's nightmares had gradually faded, replaced by excited chatter about her art class and the friends she was making at school. The little girl who had once communicated only through desperate sign language now filled their home with laughter and animated stories about her day. Dr. Sarah Chen, Elena's therapist, marveled at the child's resilience and the way genuine security had allowed her personality to flourish. The transformation was so complete that newcomers to their story could hardly believe the confident, talkative girl had ever lived through such trauma. Elena's former selective mutism had evolved into something beautiful. She'd become an advocate for other children facing difficult circumstances. She volunteered at the local children's center, using her sign language skills to communicate with deaf students and her own experience to comfort kids going through family crises. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed that Elena possessed an unusual emotional maturity and empathy that made other children naturally gravitate toward her for support. The little girl who had once felt invisible and voiceless was now helping others find their own voices. Elena's artwork, once dark and fearful, now burst with bright colors and hopeful themes that decorated not just their refrigerator, but also the walls of Dr. Chen's office. Her drawings frequently featured judges, social workers, and community helpers surrounded by rainbows and hearts. Maria often found Elena practicing sign language in front of the mirror, preparing to teach other children the communication skills that had literally saved their lives. The Santos family's transformation had ripple effects throughout their community that surprised even the most optimistic social workers. Maria's journey from desperate homelessness to stable employment inspired other families to seek help rather than suffer in silence. The church shelter where they had found refuge experienced a surge in both families seeking assistance and volunteers offering support. Elena's story became a case study in local social work programs, demonstrating how quickly children could recover when their basic needs for safety and stability were met. Maria began speaking at community events, sharing her experience to help others understand the hidden face of family homelessness in their city. Her testimony was powerful because it came from lived experience rather than academic theory. The mother who had once been too proud to ask for help now advocated fearlessly for other families in crisis. Judge Caprio visited the Santos family on a quiet Sunday afternoon, bringing flowers for Maria and a new sketchbook for Elena. As he sat in their bright living room, surrounded by Elena's artwork and the comfortable chaos of a family rebuilding their lives, Frank felt a profound sense of peace. "You saved us," Maria said simply, serving him coffee in mismatched but cheerful mugs they had collected from thrift stores. Elena, now chattering confidently in both English and sign language, showed the judge her latest drawing. A courtroom filled with children holding hands, while a kind man in black robes smiled down at them from his bench. The transformation was complete. A desperate family had found stability, a traumatized child had found her voice, and a community had rediscovered its capacity for compassion. Frank realized that sometimes the greatest victories in life come not from following rules, but from having the courage to break them when love demands it. The story of Judge Caprio's compassionate intervention reached far beyond Providence when CNN picked up Maria Gonzalez's local news report. Within days, major networks were calling the courthouse, requesting interviews with the judge who had broken protocol to help a homeless family. Ellen DeGeneres invited Judge Caprio and the Santos family to appear on her show, creating a segment that would be viewed by millions of Americans. The video of Elena signing her desperate plea for help followed by the judge's unprecedented response, went viral across social media platforms. Break Protocol for Love became a trending hashtag as people shared their own stories of times when compassion had triumphed over rigid rules. President Biden's press secretary mentioned the story during a briefing about childhood poverty, calling Judge Caprio's actions an example of American values at their finest. International news outlets picked up the story, with BBC and Reuters featuring it as a symbol of hope during challenging global times. Letters poured into the Providence courthouse from around the world, with people sharing their own experiences of homelessness, trauma, and the transformative power of unexpected kindness. A retired teacher from Tokyo wrote about how Elena's courage inspired her to volunteer with deaf children in her community. A father from Germany described how Judge Caprio's example motivated him to help a homeless family in his own neighborhood. Children from schools across America sent drawings and letters to Elena, creating an outpouring of support that filled several boxes in the courthouse office. The Make-A-Wish Foundation contacted Elena's family, though Maria gently explained that her daughter's wishes had already been granted. Hollywood producers called about potential movie rights, though Judge Caprio politely declined all commercial offers. The story had touched something universal, the recognition that sometimes the most important rules are the unwritten ones about human decency and compassion. Judge Caprio was invited to speak at Harvard Law School's annual Ethics Symposium, where his presentation on When Justice Requires Breaking Protocol received a standing ovation from professors and students alike. The American Bar Association, initially critical of his actions, eventually invited him to address their national conference about balancing institutional integrity with individual compassion. His speech, titled "The Child Who Reminded Me Why I Became a Judge," was later published in multiple legal journals. Elena's elementary school received funding from anonymous donors inspired by her story, allowing them to expand their sign language program and trauma counseling services. The ripple effects continued growing as other judges quietly began implementing more flexible approaches to cases involving family hardship. Legal scholars started debating whether judicial systems needed formal mechanisms for addressing extraordinary human circumstances. The conversation Elena had started with her silent signals was now reshaping discussions about justice and mercy at the highest levels of American jurisprudence. The most meaningful recognition came not from media outlets or prestigious institutions, but from the families who reached out to share how the story had changed their own perspectives on seeking help during difficult times. Social workers reported increased willingness from families to engage with support services, as Elena's story had demonstrated that asking for help could lead to hope rather than punishment. The Providence Department of Children and Families experienced a surge in volunteer applications from community members inspired by Judge Caprio's example. Elena herself became a junior ambassador for several children's advocacy organizations, using her newfound confidence to speak at events about the importance of listening to children's voices. Her sign language skills, once born from trauma, now served as a bridge to help other children communicate their needs to adults who cared enough to pay attention. The national attention had transformed a local act of compassion into a movement that reminded America that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. 5 years after Elena's silent signal changed everything, Judge Frank Caprio stood before a packed auditorium at the Providence Community Center. The annual Compassion in Action award ceremony had grown from a small local event to a nationally recognized celebration of everyday heroes. Elena, now 12 and confidently bilingual in both English and American Sign Language, served as the evening's youth ambassador. She had grown into a poised young woman whose early trauma had transformed into a powerful gift for helping others navigate their own difficult circumstances. Maria sat in the front row, her nursing school graduation cap beside her chair, representing her journey from homelessness to healthcare professional. The audience included families they had helped, judges who had adopted more compassionate approaches, and community leaders inspired by their story. Frank looked out at the crowd and marveled at how one child's desperate plea had created a movement that continued growing years later. The judicial ethics hearing that had once threatened Frank's career had ultimately vindicated his actions, establishing new guidelines that balanced institutional integrity with humanitarian response. The Caprio Protocol was now taught in law schools across the country, providing judges with a framework for addressing extraordinary circumstances while maintaining judicial standards. Elena's case had become required reading in social work programs, demonstrating how children's nonverbal communication often carried the most crucial information about family crises. Frank had written a book about his experience, with all proceeds funding scholarships for homeless students and sign language programs in schools. The Rhode Island Supreme Court had honored him with a special commendation for advancing the cause of justice through compassion. His colleagues, once critical of his protocol breach, now sought his advice on handling cases involving vulnerable families. The transformation of institutional attitudes proved that change was possible when individual courage sparked collective reflection. Elena's influence extended far beyond the courtroom that had first heard her silent plea for help. She had testified before Congress about childhood homelessness, her articulate presentation moving senators to tears and inspiring bipartisan legislation supporting family housing programs. Her artwork was displayed in galleries, with pieces focusing on themes of hope, communication, and the power of being truly seen by others. Elena mentored younger children in foster care, using her own experience to help them navigate the complex emotions of family instability. She had created a foundation called Silent Voices that trained adults to recognize and respond to children's nonverbal cries for help. Her story was featured in textbooks, inspiring a new generation of social workers, teachers, and judges to pay closer attention to the quietest members of society. Elena's journey from desperate child to confident advocate proved that trauma, when met with genuine compassion, could become a source of strength rather than permanent damage. As Frank concluded his remarks that evening, he reflected on the unexpected ways that breaking protocol had enriched rather than diminished his understanding of justice. Elena approached the podium to deliver the evening's final message, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the audience in both spoken words and sign language. 5 years ago, I thought no one could hear me, she said, her hands moving gracefully as she spoke. But Judge Caprio taught me that the right person will always find a way to listen when a child needs help. Maria wiped away tears of pride as her daughter continued. Now I know that my voice, whether spoken or signed, has the power to create change. The standing ovation that followed seemed to echo through time, connecting that moment to the desperate little girl who had once sat in a courtroom with nothing but hope and a stuffed rabbit. Frank realized that his greatest legacy wouldn't be the cases he had decided or the laws he had interpreted, but the reminder that justice without compassion is merely procedure, while compassion guided by justice can transform the world one family at a time. And that's how one little girl's desperate signal transformed not just her own life, but reminded an entire nation that true justice requires courage to break the rules when humanity demands it. What do you think about Judge Caprio's decision? Subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below.